What does it take to cross two of the world's most demanding industries, fashion and film, and succeed in both, only to be found lifeless in your Paris apartment 2 days before your 29th birthday? In 2009, Lucy Gordon had real Hollywood credits, the most coveted role of her career, and the heartfelt endorsement of one of the most iconic women in 20th-century French culture to play her on screen. She wasn't a model dabbling in acting. She was the real thing. Someone who had put in the years, stacked the credits, and was finally standing at the edge of a breakthrough she had genuinely earned. But behind the rising star status was a story no one in the industry wanted to look at too closely. One that ended in tragedy at the exact moment her biggest film was being promoted at Cannes. And the worst part? The show went on without her. So what really happened to Lucy Gordon? And what does her story say about the two industries that built her up and never once asked if she was okay? To understand that, you have to go back to where it all started. Lucy Gordon was born on May 22nd, 1980, in Oxford, England. She wasn't born into fashion or film, no connections, no industry family, no leg up of any kind. She was a bright, artistically inclined student at Oxford High School, and the modeling world found her before she had fully figured out what she wanted to do with her life. A talent spotter from a modeling agency noticed her at a clothes show live exhibition, and just like that, the decision was halfway made for her. That is how the industry works. It does not wait for you to be ready. She was signed to Select Modeling Agency in London, and the bookings came fast. By 1997, she had become a face of CoverGirl, one of the most recognizable beauty campaigns in the world at that time, and her covers for Italian Glamour and Elle were establishing her as a serious editorial presence internationally. And here is what people forget about that era. The late 90s and early 2000s were one of the most relentless periods in the history of the global fashion machine. Luxury brand advertising was booming, the industry was expanding aggressively across every market, and the expectation placed on models was simple. Be everywhere, always, and never look tired doing it. For a young woman entering that world, the pace was brutal from day one, city to city, booking to booking, with no real anchor anywhere. But Gordon was not satisfied with just modeling. She wanted to act. And unlike so many models who say that and do nothing about it, she actually pursued it, seriously, methodically, without shortcuts. She took the auditions that guaranteed nothing, built relationships inside a film industry that had every reason to dismiss her, and positioned herself to be judged on real ability rather than just her appearance. In an industry that assumed models could not act, and was always quietly waiting to be proven right, that required genuine discipline over years. And building that foundation meant absorbing the full weight of two demanding industries at the same time. The runway bookings and the auditions were not happening in comfortable, separate compartments. They were happening simultaneously, in the same years, in the same cities far from home. What looked like momentum from the outside was, from the inside, an extraordinary amount of sustained pressure on one person. Her first screen appearances came in 2001. She appeared in Perfume, a quiet, credible entry into the film world. And that same year, landed a role in Serendipity, the John Cusack and Kate Beckinsale romantic comedy with wide mainstream distribution. Not a lead role, and nobody expected it to be. But that is not the point. The point is, she got in the room, earned the part, and held her own on a professional film set. For someone making a real career transition rather than a calculated PR move, those early credits were the foundation that mattered. In 2002, she appeared in The Four Feathers, Shekhar Kapoor's period drama starring Heath Ledger and Wes Bentley. Again, not the lead, but another legitimate credit alongside serious names in a serious production. Later on in 2005, she landed a significant European role in Cedric Klapisch's The Russian Dolls, shot across Paris and St. Petersburg, a film that put her directly in front of French audiences and deepened her connection to a city that was slowly becoming her home. And then in 2007 came the role that put her in front of the biggest possible audience, Spider-Man 3. She played reporter Jennifer Dugan in one of the highest-grossing films of that year. The movie had its problems: overcrowded, overstuffed, and Raimi himself would later distance from the final cut. But its commercial scale was undeniable. Hundreds of millions of people saw that film. At 26 years old, Lucy Gordon was in it. She had earned that through consistent, unglamorous work, and the foundation was only getting stronger. Here's the thing about a woman like Lucy Gordon: the public image and the private reality were operating in completely different worlds. From the outside, she looked like a charmed life: British, educated, multilingual, physically striking, genuinely talented. The effortless woman who glides through beautiful spaces without any visible cost. But that image is always a construction, and in her case, it was an expensive one. Modeling at the professional level she was operating at treats the human body as a product and the person inside it as largely secondary. And the industry is almost proudly unapologetic about that. The schedules are brutal and irregular. Professional relationships are transactional by design. And the constant physical assessment, the casting directors who look you up and down and say nothing, the rejections that arrive without explanation, the approvals that feel conditional on everything staying exactly the same, that accumulates in ways nobody on the outside ever sees. Add to that the geography. Gordon was moving between London, New York, and Paris for years. 3 of the most expensive, high-pressure cities in the world, none of which give you the ordinary continuity of life that most people take completely for granted. No stable friendships, no consistent routine, no real sense of belonging anywhere. That kind of rootlessness has a documented cost. There's also the specific weight of being a young English woman embedded in Paris. A city with its own cultural logic, its own professional demands, its own idea of what a woman of her profile should represent. Gordon was, by all accounts, fluent in French and comfortable in Parisian circles.
But I'm talking about the other guy who was also mad about me, Philippe.
But being professionally comfortable in a city is not the same as belonging to it. That distinction, sustained over years, is a very specific kind of loneliness that does not show up in any press release. Film added its own layer of pressure on top of all that. Despite her growing credits, Gordon was still in the grinding middle phase of an acting career. Known enough to be considered for serious roles, but not yet famous enough to have any real institutional support behind her. Visible enough to be publicly scrutinized. Not powerful enough to control the narrative around herself. It is one of the most precarious positions in a business that specializes in precarious positions. And it is also the position that nobody in the industry ever seems particularly interested in talking about. And then came the role that was supposed to change everything. For the biographical film Gainsbourg, A Heroic Life, directed by Joanne Sfar, Gordon was cast as Jane Birkin, the English actress and singer who became one of Serge Gainsbourg's most famous companions and one of the defining cultural figures of 20th century France. This was not a minor casting decision. Jane Birkin was a cultural institution in her own right. A woman with a specific voice, a distinct physical presence, and a deeply loyal following who would scrutinize any portrayal without mercy. Getting that role was significant. Playing it convincingly was an enormous ask. But what the outside world never knew was how hard that role had been to win. Gordon had initially been turned away by the film's casting director. The conversation ended before it could properly begin. Rather than accept that, she wrote a personal letter directly to director Sfar, made a case for herself on her own terms, and convinced him to meet her. He did, and she won him over completely. Sfar would later say that even Keira Knightley had been considered, but that Lucy simply was Jane. That specific combination of bearing, intelligence, and warmth was not something you could manufacture or cast around. Once the role was hers, Gordon did something that took real courage. She went to visit Jane Birkin herself. Jane later recalled the encounter in Le Nouvel Observateur, saying there was such freshness and honesty in Gordon's face that she couldn't help but feel genuinely flattered to be the one being portrayed. That is not a courtesy statement. That is something else entirely. For Lucy Gordon, it was the most significant professional validation of her career. earned through persistence, not luck. She was 28 years old, and for the first time, she was standing directly in front of the moment that makes all the unglamorous years finally make sense. But unfortunately, she never got to walk through it. On May 20th, 2009, Lucy Gordon was found dead in her Paris apartment, 2 days before her 29th birthday. She had taken her own life. Reports at the time noted she had been deeply affected by the recent death of a close friend from Britain, a friend who had taken their own life, a loss that had clearly left its mark in the weeks leading up to her death. That context does not explain everything. It rarely does, but it matters because it is part of the real story, the one that exists beneath every public-facing image of a woman at the top of her game. And here is the detail that should stay with you. At the exact moment she was found dead in that apartment, the Cannes Film Festival was in full swing on the French Riviera. Gainsbourg, A Heroic Life, the film she had spent years working toward, was being actively promoted there. The promotional materials were circulating, interviews were being arranged. The full machinery of a major film launch was running at full speed, built entirely on the foundation of work that one of its key contributors would never see recognized in her own lifetime. The press events, the screenings, the carefully curated parties on the Côte d'Azur. All of it happening at the same time, in the same country, a few hundred kilometers away. That is not a poetic metaphor someone invented in retrospect. That is just what happened. The industry's response was exactly what it always is in these situations. Carefully worded tributes, statements from colleagues about her talent and warmth. The whole architecture of public mourning assembled efficiently, and then just as efficiently dismantled. Because the calendar does not stop. The shows do not stop. The next auditions were already scheduled before the tributes had even finished. Released in French cinemas in January 2010, Gainsbourg, A Heroic Life was received with real critical acclaim. The film went on to win 3 César Awards, and at the very end of the closing credits, there is a simple dedication. To Lucy. Sfar explained it directly. It referred to Gordon, to the actress who had poured everything into that role and would never see it reach an audience. And then, as it always does, the conversation moved on to the next film, the next actress, the next festival. That is always how fast it moves. What never happened, and this is the part worth being genuinely angry about, was any structural reckoning with the conditions that placed Lucy Gordon in that position in the first place. The model-to-actress narrative is one of the most seductive stories both industries love to tell. It projects aspiration and success and glamour. What it never honestly accounts for is what it actually costs. Living between cities and identities for years, being the model who must project physical perfection and the actress who must be emotionally exposed simultaneously, with no sustained support structure around either version of yourself. The same industry that publicly mourned her was the one that had spent years extracting maximum output from her at minimum cost, operating on the comfortable assumption that the person inside the frame could simply absorb whatever was demanded of her. These industries generate extraordinary wealth from the people they employ. What they invest back into the actual structural well-being of those people, as opposed to the performative grief issued after the fact, is negligible. Tributes are free. Real care costs something, and the industry has consistently chosen the cheaper option. Lucy Gordon was not a lesson anyone chose to learn from. She was a tragedy that got processed, filed, and moved past. The next talented young woman navigating an unfamiliar city without a sufficient safety net was already being discovered somewhere. And that, right there, is what the show must go on has always actually meant. She wrote a personal letter to a director who didn't know her name, convinced him she was the only person who could play the role, walked into Jane Birkin's home, and earned her genuine respect. And then, she was gone. 2 days before her 29th birthday, the credits rolled with a dedication to her, the awards were handed out, the industry moved on. So here is the question worth genuinely sitting with. How many versions of Lucy Gordon's story are quietly unfolding right now in cities across the world, and what exactly is the industry prepared to do about it? Curious to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.